Medical workers of Reddit, what were the most haunting last words you've heard from a patient? My uncle was born with Down syndrome. He was 42 when he died, but had the mind of a 3-ish years old. He could do things like brush his teeth, dress himself, etc., but needed prompting and supervision. My ma, his mother, died in 1974. My uncle died in 1984. The night before he died he told all of us that mama came to see me last night. My dad asked him if he had a dream about mama. He said no. She sat on my bed with me and told me she was coming to get me soon and take me home with her and not to be scared because it was all okay. We dismissed it. 24 hours later he was dead. He died peacefully in his sleep. My uncle had a near-death experience when his pancreas failed. He went to the fridge, opened a half-gallon of orange juice, took a few massive gulps, then turned to walk away and lost consciousness and fell to the floor. My cousin just happened to be stopping by to check on him within the next hour, so he was very lucky to be rushed to the hospital straight away. The doctors immediately knew his pancreas had failed, so his body could no longer regulate blood sugar. Drinking the orange juice had caused his blood sugar to spike to an insane level which they said they had never seen anyone survive from. I forget the actual number. Well, he's a tough old dog and did survive, just as he survived the Vietnam War and a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. He was given a few months to live about 5 years ago, among many other things. Seriously, this man has 9 lives. For a few days, he was completely delirious, didn't know the year or the names of loved ones, and he kept babbling about room 101. We had no idea what he was on about. But within a week, his mental state was back to normal, and he told us he had a strange dream. Now he has never been a religious man, he's a real salt of the earth cigarette smoking, motorcycle driving charmingly rugged and matter-of-fact sort of guy. He almost didn't want to believe this was anything more than a hallucination. When I heard it, I told him it surely couldn't have been. He very slightly teared up and said, "Do you think so?" It felt real, as if he had needed the confirmation from someone else. His first memory after drinking the orange juice was waking up in a wheelchair in the hospital. Some blurry figures, nurses and doctors he figured, said something along the lines of "this one needs to go to room 101. He remembers being wheeled into a room that has a golden 101 on the door and left alone in the room. It was bright and empty, except for 2 thrones that said South Dakota and SG. My whole extended family has spent a lot of time speculating what those acronyms could mean. Supreme Devil and Supreme God. Spiritual decline or spiritual gain. My uncle didn't even come to these conclusions, he just remembers wondering what they stood for at the time. Then, he said something entered the room that didn't look like anything, but it was a presence. I couldn't tell you if it was even a male voice or female voice, but it asked him, "Nick C., what sort of life do you think you've lived?" He thought about it and said, "Well, I think I've done a lot of bad things, and I think I've done a lot of good things, but I think the good things outweigh the bad." He said there was a long pause, then it said, "I would agree with that. Do you want to go back to your life as Nick C, or do you want to come with me?" He said he knew what it was asking, and he said he wanted to go back to his life. Then, here's the part that really confused him. The presence said something like, "Okay then. You can go back to your life. But, you must promise me something." He said sure, of course, anything, expecting to hear something profound and a bit scared of what it would be. What it asked of him was just no more ice cream. He was confused, but gladly agreed. Then, the thing was gone. He said he just knew it had left the room. Someone came and wheeled him out of the room, and the next thing he remembered was starting to wake up in the hospital bed with his whole family around him. There is no room 101, and no one had wheeled him anywhere in a wheelchair at all. We asked the hospital staff. We wondered about the ice cream thing. What's interesting is that he basically is now diabetic after this. A blood sugar spike is the reason he nearly died in the first place, but when this strange dream or whatever it was occurred, he didn't know that yet. Had no idea his pancreas failed. Just drank some Oj and blacked out. So maybe he had. This is a common occurrence. I'm a tech in a hospital, I've seen this before. Patients pick their moment, often. The first I ever saw as a professional was a guy who said he was scared to die alone when he was lucid. He was DNR, me and my coworkers held his hand for the first 3 hours of my shift, taking turns. His family finally showed up at about 2 a.m. His wife and adopted daughters were there. They went in, and he was dead in 10 minutes. He was waiting for his family to go. He died at 98, with the people he loved, in a warm, comfortable drug bed. We gave him drugs for anxiety and pain, so it was as peaceful as could be. He had a really good death. When I was 13, my grandfather had a heart attack. He hung around for 36 hours. He hung around for the whole family to show up, and then promptly died. Dude was always a fan of having an audience. More recently, I had a guy in his 60s with lung cancer. He was a DNR. His wife said, "Honey, if tonight is the night, that's okay, I understand, I love you and I always will." He gave a thumbs up, smiled, and died 10 minutes later. As a healthcare worker, I firmly believe you helped soothe her at the end. I think of it like falling asleep, you say hey, it's okay, I got it from here, and then they can relax and let it go. Nurse, in hospital caring for 40-ish man with brain tumor, coming in and out of consciousness. Not to be resuscitated. His 16-year-old daughter was crying non-stop for 12 hours. His wife, who had been given a few months to prepare herself, was calm and focused on her husband. I had to routinely check his level of consciousness, which involved talking to him in a loud voice, response to auditory stimulation, which I did not like to do. So I asked his wife to do the loud voice part, so the voice he would hear would be hers, not mine, and she did so without hesitation. The only response we observed with her vocalization was that this by now profoundly unconscious patient took her hand to his lips and kissed it. He stopped breathing very at a patient on the cardiac ICU during my second month of intern year who had newly diagnosed heart failure that we couldn't figure out what caused it. He was a healthy guy. In his 60s. Did yoga every day, walked a few miles 5 days a week. Genuinely nice guy, which is always a bad prognostic sign. With his heart failure, his heart was so stretched out and not squeezing adequately to provide the blood and subsequent oxygen he needs to the rest of his body. A few nights into his hospital stay, I come in the next morning and discovered that the senior resident had to code him for sustained unstable heart arrhythmia, unstable VTach. I went and talked with him about it the next morning and he told me that he was in and out of consciousness during it all, from the low blood pressure, but he compared it to the feeling of jumping out of the plane and skydiving. Later that morning I was checking on him again and he didn't look so good. He goes into the arrhythmia again, drops his blood pressure, and is in and out of consciousness. As I'm charging the defibrillator to shock him again, he comes back around to and briefly and asks me if I'm taking him skydiving again and lets out a nerve. My mom and I cared for my grandmother in her final months. We were at her house pretty much every day, cleaning her up, feeding her, helping her to the restroom, and keeping her company. My grandfather was and is still alive, but he's a shit. We had already done our crying and mourning and were ready to let her go when the time came. When she was clinging to life in the hospital, my aunt and uncles came out of the woodworks. The doctor asked if they should resuscitate and they all emphatically said yes, to do whatever it takes to keep her alive. Basically they were guilty about not having come around until her final moments and wanted to drag out her misery to make themselves feel better. My mom and I put our foot down. That's not what grandma wanted and it sure as hell wasn't what she deserved. It was a fight, but we won in the end and she was able to go without a fight on her end when it was time. People can be real selfish assholes.